My name is Miyuki. I am a logistics director, and on Christmas night, my parents locked me out of their house in the snow and would not let me back in for so much as a coat. I stood on the porch with my purse on my shoulder and nothing else, and through the gap in the door, Maribel said the thing she had been saying my whole life. You cannot do anything on your own. Miyuki, you are desperate. Behind her, my brother pulled the curtain shut. The next morning, I drove to the bank. 48 hours later, Maribel was not the one giving orders anymore. But to understand why I cut their financial oxygen so ruthlessly, we have to go back 3 days. We have to go back to the moment my 17-year-old nephew, Andrew, walked out of my daughter's bedroom. If you have ever been called desperate by the very people draining your bank account, tell me where you are listening from today. The truth leaves a trace. The fog was rolling heavy through the streets of Portland that evening. My daughter, Hannah, is 17 years old. She is quiet, deeply observant, and she saves every single penny she earns for her photography. She had just won a local art contest and used the prize money to buy a professional camera lens. It cost $1,850. It was her absolute pride and joy. Andrew had come over for dinner with Stephanie and David. Andrew also is 17, but that is where the similarities end. Andrew wants to be an influencer. He wants the aesthetics of wealth without the burden of labor. While we were clearing the table, Andrew wandered upstairs. 10 minutes later, he walked back down, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking completely unbothered. I went upstairs to check on Hannah. I found her kneeling on the floor of her bedroom. She was holding a cracked plastic lens cap in her palm. The expensive lens was gone. Hannah was biting her lower lip, taking shallow breaths, trying so incredibly hard not to cry. She did not want to make a scene. She knew my job in supply chain logistics was stressful, and she never wanted to be a burden. That specific kind of silent suffering broke something fundamental inside me. I walked downstairs and asked Andrew where the lens was. He did not even flinch. Stephanie rolled her eyes and adjusted her oversized cashmere sweater. He needs it for his channel. Miyuki, she sighed. He needs high-quality aesthetics. Hannah just takes pictures of trees anyway. She can share. Maribel, sitting on my sofa with a cup of chamomile tea, clicked her tongue in agreement. Oh, please relax, Maribel said. It is just a camera piece. It is not like he stole a car. Watching Andrew smirk in the safety of their delusion, I did not yell. I did not throw them out into the damp Oregon night. I felt my pulse slow down to a steady, rhythmic beat. I offered a very small, very calm smile. You are absolutely right, I said quietly. It is just a lens. Stephanie exhaled, her shoulders dropping in relief. Maribel took another sip of her tea. They thought they had won. They assumed they had successfully bullied me into submission one more time. My silence was completely deafening. By 11:15, my house was finally empty. Hannah was asleep in her room, her eyes swollen from the tears she had held back all evening. I sat alone at my kitchen island. The glowing screen of my laptop was the only light in the room. Outside, the Portland rain began to lash against the large glass windows, a steady, drumming sound that matched the quiet focus in my mind. I opened my primary banking portal. For 6 months, I had been the silent sponsor of Stephanie's so-called spiritual healing journey. I opened the spreadsheet where I tracked my expenses. The numbers stared back at me, crisp and undeniable. There was the premium country club membership, the organic, gluten-free meal delivery service that arrived at their door twice a week, the luxury maintenance package for Stephanie's car, the high-speed fiber optic internet, the premium streaming bundles, and the expensive live streaming platform subscriptions that Andrew supposedly needed to build his brand. It totaled exactly $4,260. Every single month, all tied directly to my credit card and my checking account. Accessing the first billing profile, I found the button for automatic payments. I clicked cancel. A small confirmation box popped up. I clicked Confirm. I moved down the list systematically, like an executive clearing a backlog of bad inventory. Cancel. Confirm. Cancel. Confirm. I did not feel a trace of anger. Anger is a hot, chaotic emotion that makes you reckless. I felt like a surgeon excising a parasite. I was simply removing a massive operational inefficiency from my life. I clicked until the entire list was gone. No more country club. No more organic meals. No more premium internet for Andrew's gaming streams. Then, just before closing the browser, I opened a hidden, password-protected folder on my desktop. There was only one file inside. It was named promissory_David_Steph_2024.pdf. My late husband had been a brilliant, cautious man. 2 years ago, when Stephanie begged for a massive loan to open her holistic meditation room, he made sure I secured it. He told me to keep this document safe and never mention it until they crossed a line I could not forgive. I left the laptop open. I finally closed my eyes. The blue light from the screen illuminated my empty coffee mug. Sitting in the stillness of my kitchen, I listened to the hum of the refrigerator. Every single utility bill at Stephanie's address was registered in my name. The power, the water, the gas. I had just logged into the local utility portals and removed my billing information from every single one of them. It takes exactly 4 clicks to stop funding someone's electricity. It takes 0 effort for an automated utility system to process a past due balance. Stephanie's accounts were heavily in arrears before I ever stepped in to rescue her 6 months ago. The moment my card vanished from the system, those old balances would trigger immediate administrative action. I imagined the digital signals traveling through the rainy night, severing the invisible financial lifelines that kept their comfortable, subsidized existence afloat. They were asleep right now. Stephanie was probably wrapped in the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets I had paid for, completely unaware that her financial oxygen had just been permanently cut off. The house felt incredibly vast and quiet. I walked upstairs, pausing just outside Hannah's doorway. The hall light spilled across the foot of her bed. She was curled tightly under her quilt. Her breathing was steady, but her hands were still balled into tight little fists resting on her pillow. She had worked every single weekend for a year to buy that lens. She had skipped movies with her friends. She had earned her joy through discipline, and my family had taken it from her simply because Andrew wanted it and did not want to work for it. I pulled her blanket up slightly, ensuring she was warm against the damp cold seeping through the windows. Tomorrow, the sun would rise, and their perfectly curated world was going to stop spinning. The illusions they had built on my dime would evaporate the second they tried to turn on a light switch or connect to a router. Returning to my own bedroom, I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I knew exactly who would be standing on my porch when the rain stopped. I was ready for tomorrow. You might wonder why a corporate logistics director would ever let herself be drained like that. Why would a woman who negotiates million-dollar freight contracts allow her own sister to siphon $4,000 a month from her bank account? The answer is profound conditioning. From the time I was 7 years old, Maribel taught me my precise role in the family ecosystem. Stephanie was the delicate flower. She was the artist, the fragile soul who needed constant protection and saving. I, on the other hand, was the breakwater. When the waves of reality crashed, I was expected to stand firm, take the brutal impact, and ensure Stephanie never got wet. If I earned a perfect grade, Maribel told me to hide my report card because my success made Stephanie feel inadequate. When I worked triple shifts in college to buy a reliable car, I was expected to hand over my keys every weekend because Stephanie was going through a tough emotional season and needed to drive to the coast to clear her head. It became a deeply ingrained reflex. I did not pay her massive bills out of stupidity. I paid them because I was purchasing a fake, fragile piece. I wanted Hannah to have a grandmother who smiled at her. I wanted her to have an aunt who showed up to her birthdays. I genuinely believed my financial bleeding was just the standard family tax I owed for being the capable one. I swallowed my resentment to keep the waters calm. I accepted the role of the silent machine. But sitting in that dark kitchen, watching my daughter suffer because I had enabled their boundless greed, the illusion shattered entirely. I realized I was not keeping the peace. I was not protecting my family. I was just a highly functioning hostage funding my own captivity. Every time I wrote a check, I was teaching Andrew that other people's labor existed solely for his convenience. I was teaching Hannah that her boundaries did not matter as much as her aunt's comfort. The realization tasted like ash in my mouth. My capacity to endure had been weaponized against my own child. I was officially done paying the ransom. The breakwater had just collapsed. The storm hit Portland just before dawn. At exactly 2 minutes past 6 in the morning, a heavy, frustrated, desperate knock rattled the glass of my front door. I was already awake. I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking my coffee, watching the gray light filter through the rain-streaked windows. I set my mug down, pulled my robe tighter around my shoulders, and walked to the entryway. I did not rush. Opening the door, I found David standing on my porch. My brother-in-law was soaked to the bone. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his shoulders were hunched against the freezing wind. He was breathing heavily, holding his phone in his hand like a dead piece of plastic. He looked like a man who had gone to sleep in a warm bed and woken up in the middle of a war zone. He did not step inside. He just stared at me with wide, frantic eyes. "Miyuki, what did you turn off?" he asked, his voice trembling. I leaned against the doorframe, completely unaffected by his panic. "Good morning, David." "Please do not do this," he pleaded, wiping the rain from his face. "The power company sent an automated shutoff notice at midnight. The internet is completely dead. Andrew is screaming upstairs because his gaming servers went down. Stephanie is having a total meltdown in the kitchen. The car insurance app sent an alert that the payment method was removed. What did you turn off?" "Everything," I replied smoothly. "I turned off everything I was paying for." The frantic energy drained out of his face, replaced instantly by profound, naked shock. He stood frozen in the rain for a long moment. "You were paying for all of that." That was the first real surprise of my morning. I had assumed David was a passive participant in Stephanie's financial parasitism. I had assumed he simply chose to look the other way because arguing with my sister was like arguing with a hurricane. You just boarded up the windows and hoped to survive. But looking at his pale, horrified expression, I realized he genuinely did not know. "She told me Maribel was helping with the electric bill," he whispered, staring out at the flooded street as if searching for answers in the asphalt. "She told me you were just covering Andrew's internet because you got some corporate discount through your logistics firm. She told me she was handling everything else." I stepped back and opened the door wider. I did not offer him a warm towel or words of comfort. I simply motioned for him to come inside. "Come into the kitchen, David," I said calmly. "We need to look at some numbers." He stepped across the threshold, dripping water onto my hardwood floors, moving with the slow, mechanical stiffness of a sleepwalker. He stepped into the truth. I walked to the kitchen island and picked up the thick, red folder I had prepared the night before. I slid it across the marble countertop toward David. He approached it as if it might detonate. Inside were 6 months of printed bank statements, utility confirmations, and subscription receipts. I had highlighted every single charge tied to his home address. $4,260, I said, my voice steady and quiet. "That is what I have been paying every single month, so your wife could find her spiritual center." David opened the folder. He flipped to the first page. His hands began to shake. He saw the premium country club fees. He saw the organic meal deliveries. He saw the massive bills for high-speed fiber internet and Andrew's streaming subscriptions. His eyes scanned the dates and the amounts, his jaw tightening with every line item. "She told me these were necessities," he choked out, staring at a $300 charge for a boutique fitness app. She told me her life coach said she needed to practice financial independence. She said she had negotiated hardship plans with the utility companies. Apparently, I replied, financial independence looks exactly like my Visa card. David closed his eyes. The defeat radiating from him was palpable. He was a hard-working man who put in 50 hours a week at a commercial construction site. He had trusted his wife to manage the household finances because he was simply too exhausted to fight her daily dramatic episodes. Then, he opened his eyes and looked down at his own phone. A terrifying realization washed over his features. "Wait," he whispered, swiping frantically across his dead screen before connecting to the cellular network. "Miyuki, if you were paying for the utilities, the groceries, the cars, and the internet, where was her income going? Where is my paycheck going?" He logged into his primary bank account. I watched the blood completely leave his face. He gripped the edge of the marble island so hard his knuckles turned white. "She took out a loan," he said, his voice hollow. "A massive second mortgage on the house. She forged my signature to open her holistic meditation room. She has been draining my paycheck to pay the exorbitant interest to a predatory lender." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears and absolute devastation. Stephanie had not just been siphoning my resources. She had been actively destroying her own family's foundation, hiding her massive debt behind the comfortable illusion I was blindly funding. He closed the folder. His entire marriage was fraudulent. By 8:30 in the morning, I was pulling into the underground parking garage of the Logistics Corporation, where I served as the director of operations. The building was a massive, modern structure of steel and tempered glass. It was a place built on efficiency, precision, and unbreakable contracts. It was exactly where I needed to be. I walked onto the executive floor. I did not look like a woman who had just detonated her family's financial ecosystem. I wore a tailored gray suit. My hair was pulled back perfectly. I felt a deep, abiding sense of clarity. My office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the misty Portland skyline. A few minutes after I sat down, Nora walked in. Nora is our chief accountant. She is incredibly sharp, fiercely loyal, and she can spot a fraudulent invoice from 50 yards away. She set a cup of black coffee on my desk without asking. Then she glanced at my phone, which was sitting face up on my desk. The screen was lighting up endlessly. "You have 26 missed calls from someone named Stephanie," Nora noted, raising an eyebrow. "And 7 voicemails from Maribel. Do we need to schedule a crisis meeting? Or do I need to help you hide a body?" Taking a sip of the coffee, I found it perfectly bitter. "No bodies, Nora," I said. "But I do need a professional favor. I need you to pull the complete financial records from my personal accounts for the last 6 months. I want every transfer, every auto-pay, and every digital receipt verified. I need them printed, bound, and stamped with a certified audit trail." Nora did not ask questions. She simply nodded. In our line of work, we understand that emotion is a liability. When a vendor disputes a shipment, we do not shout at them. We produce the delivery manifests. When someone tries to manipulate a contract, we highlight the legal clauses. I was preparing to apply corporate ruthlessness to a domestic dispute. "You want it bulletproof?" Nora said, turning toward the door. "I want it so irrefutable that they choke on it," I replied softly. Nora smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. She understood perfectly. Words can be twisted, tears can be weaponized, guilt can be manufactured to make the victim look like the aggressor. But numbers are absolute. Paper trails do not lie. For the next 2 hours, my phone was an active war zone of manipulation. I watched the notifications roll in while I reviewed a quarterly supply chain report. The contrast between my professional focus and their chaotic desperation was almost amusing. Maribel sent a long, dramatic text message. "Miyuki, you are tearing this family apart. Your sister is fragile. How could you do this to her over a silly camera piece? You have always been so selfish." I did not reply. Andrew tried next. "Mom is crying because of you. You are psycho. It was just a lens." I did not reply to him either. Finally, Stephanie left a voicemail. I played it on speakerphone while reviewing a spreadsheet. Her voice was breathy and trembling, meticulously engineered to sound like a wounded bird. "Miyuki, I am experiencing severe emotional violence from your actions today. My holistic guide says your capitalist obsession with money is a symptom of spiritual scarcity. You are cutting off my healing." I deleted the voicemail before she finished the sentence. For years, I had engaged in these exhausting emotional debates. I used to write long, carefully worded paragraphs trying to explain my feelings, hoping they would finally understand my perspective. I finally realized that explaining yourself to toxic people just gives them more ammunition to twist your reality. Picking up my phone, I opened the family group chat. I did not justify my actions. I did not mention the $4,000. I did not address Maribel's guilt trips or Stephanie's spiritual nonsense. I typed a single, decisive message. "Return Hannah's lens to the lobby of my office building by 12 o'clock today. If you do not, I am filing a formal police report for grand theft." I hit send. I put the phone face down on my desk. In the group chat, 3 small dots appeared indicating that Stephanie was typing. Then, the dots vanished. Maribel started typing. Then, nothing. The sudden, absolute silence that fell over the digital chat was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. They finally understood I was no longer playing their game. The countdown had officially begun. At exactly 11:45, the receptionist called my office line. She sounded slightly nervous. She informed me that a man and a teenager were in the lobby, demanding to see me. I thanked her, stood up, and smoothed the front of my jacket. When I walked out of the elevator and into the expansive, glass-walled lobby, I saw David. He was still wearing his damp work clothes. His jaw was locked tight. He held Andrew firmly by the back of his expensive designer jacket. Andrew looked utterly humiliated, shifting his weight awkwardly as corporate employees walked past them. David practically dragged Andrew over to the large glass conference table in the center of the lobby. "Put it on the table," David commanded, his voice rough. Andrew scowled, avoiding my eyes. He reached into his backpack and pulled out Hannah's professional camera lens. He set it down on the glass. I stepped forward and picked it up. My stomach tightened. There was a deep, jagged scratch running directly across the side of the casing, and the internal mounting ring was slightly bent. "I accidentally scratched it," Andrew muttered, crossing his arms defensively. "It is not a big deal. She can still use it." I placed the lens back on the table. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a courtroom judge. "It is not an accident," I said. "It is vandalism, and you will be held entirely responsible." Andrew rolled his eyes, putting on a mask of teenage bravado. "I do not have $1,800. Grandma said you cannot force me to pay for it anyway." David stepped forward, grabbing his son by the shoulder and forcing him to look up. "She does not have to force you," David said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I do. You are going down to the commercial shipping docks this weekend. You are going to load cargo in the rain, and you are going to hand every single paycheck directly to your aunt until this is paid in full." Andrew's face went completely pale. The bravado vanished instantly. For the very first time in his sheltered, subsidized life, he was facing a consequence that his mother could not manipulate, and his grandmother could not cry away. If you agree that forcing accountability is the best lesson for a spoiled kid, hit the like button right now. I looked at Andrew's wide, terrified eyes. I felt no pity. Actions finally met their consequences. The expansive glass lobby of the logistics firm was quiet, save for the faint hum of the central climate control. Andrew had retreated to a leather bench near the entrance, staring at the floor with the distinct posture of a defeated child. David did not follow his son. Instead, my brother-in-law stepped closer to me, moving with a heavy, mechanical stiffness. The anger that had fueled him moments ago was entirely gone. In its place was a terrifying, hollow despair. He looked around to ensure the receptionist was out of earshot. His face was the color of old parchment. "Miyuki," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "I went to the bank after I left your house this morning. I needed to see exactly how bad our checking account was. I needed to figure out how to pay the electric company to get the lights turned back on." I stood perfectly still, watching the devastation unfold in his eyes. I did not interrupt him. "I checked my credit profile," David continued, swallowing hard. "I found a massive second mortgage tied to our house. A high-interest, predatory commercial loan." The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in my mind with cold precision. Stephanie had not just been siphoning my money to fund her luxury lifestyle. She had been quietly digging a financial grave for her own husband. "She forged my digital signature," David said, his voice dropping to a harsh, raw rasp. "She used the equity in our home to fund the lease and the renovations for that holistic meditation center she opened last year. The center that has never generated a single dollar of profit. The payments are astronomical. She has been draining my weekly construction paychecks just to cover the interest, while you paid for everything else to keep the illusion alive. Do you know what she spent it on?" "Miyuki." David's voice began to shake, a violent tremor that started in his chest and radiated down to his calloused hands. I pulled the itemized vendor receipts from the bank. She didn't just lease a commercial space. She bought imported, backlit Himalayan salt walls that cost $12,000. She bought custom-made acoustic crystal singing bowls from some fraud guru in Sedona for another $8,000. She installed a bespoke, climate-controlled organic tea bar. He let out a harsh, broken laugh that sounded more like a sob. "I have been working 55 hours a week. I eat cold sandwiches in the cab of my truck in the freezing rain to save lunch money. I wear steel-toed boots that have holes in the soles because she told me we needed to be on a strict budget this year to build generational wealth. And she took the equity of the only home I have ever owned to buy $12,000 salt walls." Andrew, still sitting on the leather bench, slowly looked up. The teenager's face was completely drained of color. The arrogant, dismissive attitude he had walked in with was actively dissolving. "Dad," Andrew whispered, his voice cracking like a frightened child's. "What do you mean she took the equity Mom said Aunt Miyuki was just being a psycho? Mom said we were rich because of her brand deals." David turned slowly to look at his son. There was no warmth in his eyes, only the hollowed-out stare of a man who realized his entire existence was a lie. "Your mother does not have brand deals. Andrew, your mother is a thief. She stole from my future. She stole from your aunt, and she encouraged you to steal from your cousin. We are not rich. We are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And we are going to lose the house." Andrew's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The designer jacket he was wearing suddenly looked like a stolen costume. For years, David had chosen the path of least resistance. He had enabled Stephanie's toxic behavior because avoiding a fight was easier than holding her accountable. He had allowed her to walk all over me, assuming my resources were limitless. But the tragic reality of enabling a parasite is that once it runs out of external hosts, it will inevitably consume you. He was staring into the absolute ruin of his marriage and his financial future. His family was essentially bankrupt. I felt no urge to comfort him. He had nothing left. I just checked my watch. The storm was exactly on schedule. For years, David had chosen the path of least resistance. He had enabled Stephanie's toxic behavior because avoiding a fight was easier than holding her accountable. He had allowed her to walk all over me, assuming my resources were limitless. But the tragic reality of enabling a parasite is that once it runs out of external hosts, it will inevitably consume you. He was staring into the absolute ruin of his marriage and his financial future. His family was essentially bankrupt. I felt no urge to comfort him. He had nothing left. At precisely 12:15, the heavy revolving glass doors of the lobby spun rapidly. The storm had finally arrived at my workplace. Stephanie marched into the atrium wearing an oversized cashmere coat and dark designer sunglasses. It was the universal, carefully curated uniform of a manufactured victim. Maribel followed closely behind her, clutching her expensive leather handbag like a defensive shield, her jaw set in a tight, judgmental line. Spotting me standing near the conference table with David, Stephanie did not hesitate. She began her performance the second her expensive boots hit the polished marble floor. "How could you do this to us?" Stephanie cried out, projecting her voice perfectly so that the security guards and passing executives could hear every word. She threw her hands in the air, creating a theatrical display of profound suffering. "You cut off my house. You are committing financial abuse against your own sister." Maribel hurried to her side, placing a comforting hand on Stephanie's shoulder while glaring at me. "Miyuki, you have lost your mind. Your sister is going through a fragile healing process, and you are traumatizing her son over a piece of plastic. Where is your family loyalty?" "Loyalty!" Stephanie shrieked, taking 3 aggressive steps toward me. She ripped her designer sunglasses off, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed and burning with unhinged malice. "You do not even know the meaning of the word. You are an empty, barren corporate robot. You sit up here in your glass tower, counting your dirty money, completely devoid of human empathy." The atrium grew suffocatingly quiet. Several executives who had been walking toward the elevators stopped dead in their tracks. A security guard placed his hand over his radio, watching the escalating volatility. Stephanie noticed the audience. It fueled her. She turned slightly, ensuring her voice carried across the marble acoustics. "You have always been jealous of me. You were jealous that I had the light, that I had the spiritual gift, while you were just a miserable, calculating machine. And now you are projecting your pathetic, miserable life onto my son." Maribel stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. Her mask of the gentle, concerned matriarch slipped, revealing the venomous core underneath. "This is exactly why your husband left you alone in this world." "Miyuki," Maribel spat, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "He probably died of the sheer stress of living with such a heartless, controlling tyrant. You drove him into an early grave, and now you are trying to destroy your own sister to make yourself feel powerful." A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd of onlookers. David, standing a few feet away, closed his eyes in pure disgust. Even Andrew flinched at his grandmother's sheer cruelty. It was the ultimate, unforgivable low blow. They were weaponizing the tragic, sudden aneurysm that took my husband 2 years ago, attempting to use his memory as a bludgeon to break my composure. They expected me to shatter. They expected me to scream, to cry, to call security and have them dragged out, proving their narrative that I was unhinged and abusive. They fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. I did not blush. I did not rush to hush her. I did not feel a single drop of anxiety. In fact, my heart rate did not even elevate. I looked at the 2 women who shared my DNA and felt absolutely nothing but clinical detachment. Standing in the center of the lobby, perfectly composed in my tailored suit, I watched them scream into the void. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet, yet it sliced through the residual echo of their screaming like a scalpel. Stephanie blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my complete lack of reaction. "What?" She spat. "I asked if you are finished performing," I replied, crossing my arms slowly. "Because you are currently standing in the headquarters of a multi-billion-dollar international logistics firm, screaming about crystal healing and my dead husband, while wearing a coat that I paid for. You look incredibly foolish. Stephanie. Stephanie's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. She lunged forward as if she were going to physically strike me, but David suddenly grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice. "Don't touch me," she screamed, trying to wrench her arm away. "David, defend me. Tell this psychopath what she is doing to our family." "Shut up, Stephanie," David growled, his voice carrying a dark, dangerous edge that I had never heard in 15 years. "Just shut your mouth." Stephanie froze, staring at her husband in absolute shock. I let the silence stretch for a few uncomfortable seconds after Stephanie finished her monologue. Then, I simply raised my hand and made a brief, calculated gesture toward the executive hallway. I signaled my chief accountant. A few employees near the elevator bank paused, their eyes widening at the unexpected domestic drama unfolding in our usually sterile corporate environment. This was Stephanie's ultimate weapon. She believed that if she created enough public embarrassment, if she weaponized her tears in front of my colleagues, I would fold. She assumed I would do anything to protect my professional reputation. She fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. I did not blush. I did not rush to hush her. I did not feel a single drop of anxiety. Standing in the center of the lobby, perfectly composed in my tailored suit, I watched them scream into the void. I let the silence stretch for a few uncomfortable seconds after Stephanie finished her monologue. Then, I simply raised my hand and made a brief, calculated gesture toward the executive hallway. I signaled my chief accountant. Nora emerged from the hallway holding the thick, red dossier she had compiled that morning. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, a rhythmic, authoritative sound that cut right through Stephanie's manufactured sobbing. Nora did not look at my sister or my mother. She simply placed the heavy binder onto the glass conference table, opened it, and stepped back with a polite, razor-sharp smile. Stephanie sneered at Nora, looking her up and down with blatant disgust. "What is this? Did you bring your little secretary down here to take notes? Miyuki, are we pretending to be important executives now?" Nora's smile did not waver, but her eyes turned incredibly cold. "I am the chief financial officer of this division, ma'am," Nora said, her voice dripping with lethal politeness. "And I am the one who personally audited the 6 months of financial parasitism you have been executing against my director. I suggest you look at the binder." Stephanie scoffed, leaning over the glass table. "I am not looking at your stupid corporate spreadsheets. This is a family matter. This is about emotional damage and spiritual abuse. There is no spiritual abuse here, Stephanie." I stepped forward, resting my fingertips on the edges of the open binder. There is only grand theft, extortion, and an aggressive refusal to participate in reality. Maribel slammed her hands onto the table. "You will not speak to her that way. She is an artist. She is a healer. She does not understand your cold, capitalistic numbers. Miyuki, you are purposely trying to confuse her to avoid taking responsibility for cutting off our lights. She understands numbers perfectly fine when she is typing my credit card into a luxury checkout portal." I countered seamlessly, never raising my voice. "She understands mathematics flawlessly when she is booking a $400 facial using my billing zip code." I flipped the first few pages over, spreading them across the glass. The bright yellow highlighter ink jumped off the pages, glaring in the atrium lights. "Let me explain something to you. Stephanie," I said, my voice carrying the steady, emotionless cadence of a boardroom negotiation. "In the real world, tears do not establish facts. Playing the victim does not rewrite reality. The only thing that matters in this room is the audit trail." Stephanie lowered her sunglasses slightly, staring at the intimidating stack of printed paper. "Let me explain something to you. Stephanie," I said, my voice carrying the steady, emotionless cadence of a boardroom negotiation. "In the real world, tears do not establish facts. Playing the victim does not rewrite reality. The only thing that matters in this room is the audit trail. I flipped the first few pages over, spreading them across the glass. Here is the audit trail, I continued smoothly. These are certified bank statements, routing records, and digital receipts. They document $4,260 a month in luxury subscriptions, country club fees, and organic meal deliveries, all funded by me. Maribel stepped forward, her face flushing with indignant anger. Those who have more are supposed to share with those who are struggling. Miyuki, you are being incredibly cruel. Meeting Maribel's gaze head-on, I refused to waver. Family does not steal an $1,800 lens from a 17-year-old girl and call it sharing. Family does not use my daughter as a personal automated teller machine. I tapped the paper with my index finger. This is not support. This is systemic financial parasitism, and I have effectively terminated the contract. Stephanie stared at the highlighted numbers. The physical evidence of her greed was undeniable. There was no emotional loophole she could exploit here. The documents were cold, objective, and brutally honest. A corporate process had entirely dismantled her emotional terrorism. The numbers do not lie. The audience in the lobby was now completely silent, watching the spectacle with rapt attention. Stephanie realized her soft, wounded aesthetic was failing drastically. The indisputable facts on the glass table were destroying her narrative in real time. When a manipulator is backed into a corner and stripped of their illusions, the mask inevitably shatters. Stephanie dropped the fragile act. Her posture straightened, and her face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest, her voice rising to a shrill, aggressive pitch. I deserve every single dollar you spent on me, Stephanie shrieked, the echo bouncing off the high glass ceilings. I had to grow up dealing with your cold, calculating personality. I had to endure your absolute lack of empathy. Maribel always knew you were a toxic presence in this family. I took that money because it is the absolute minimum you owe me for my emotional distress. Maribel gasped, seemingly shocked by the sudden ferocity of her favorite daughter. David closed his eyes and turned his head away in utter disgust. Listening to her confession out loud provided a profound sense of liberation. She had finally admitted the truth. You were never seeking spiritual healing, Stephanie, I said quietly, letting my words slice through her hysteria. You were simply seeking a limitless funding source so you could be professionally lazy. You weaponized the concept of mental health to avoid getting a job. For a fraction of a second, absolute panic flashed in her eyes. I had named her exact strategy in front of a crowd. But just as quickly as the panic appeared, it vanished. Stephanie stopped yelling. She lowered her hand. A slow, chilling smirk began to spread across her face. It was the arrogant, triumphant smile of a predator who believes they have successfully lured their prey into a hidden trap. She thought she had won. The silver doors of the lobby elevator slid open with a soft chime. A man wearing a cheap, poorly fitted gray suit stepped out onto the marble floor. He carried a scuffed leather briefcase and carried himself with an exaggerated, unearned sense of importance. He walked directly over to our table. Stephanie's smirk grew wider. She stood taller, crossing her arms over her cashmere coat, radiating absolute triumph. Miyuki, this is my legal counsel, Stephanie announced loudly, savoring every single syllable. The man opened his briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper, and slid it aggressively across the glass table toward me. I glanced down at the bold, capitalized letters at the top of the page. It was a formal cease and desist order. The lawyer cleared his throat, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear him. My client is filing an emergency injunction against you. By covering her household expenses for 6 consecutive months, you have established a legally binding precedent of financial support. Your sudden, Unannounced termination of these funds constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress and unlawful financial abandonment. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. If you do not immediately reinstate the automatic payments and restore my client's utilities within 2 hours, we will file a devastating civil lawsuit that will ruin your professional reputation. Stephanie looked at me, her eyes shining with malicious delight. She genuinely believed that a cheap legal threat from a strip mall lawyer would terrify a corporate executive into submission. She thought she had outsmarted me in my own environment. If you are waiting for Miyuki to wipe that smirk off her sister's face, subscribe so you do not miss the fallout. Studying the piece of paper, and then the lawyer. I did not tremble. I did not gasp. I did not even blink. The lawyer stood there, his hands planted firmly on the glass table. He was trying to project dominance. In corporate logistics, I negotiate with international freight conglomerates and aggressive union representatives on a weekly basis. This man was wearing a suit that did not fit properly, reciting a legal script he had probably downloaded from the internet. I did not feel threatened. I felt profoundly bored. Glancing at Nora, I did not need to issue a verbal command. She simply reached into the back pocket of her leather portfolio and pulled out a single, heavily notarized document. She placed it precisely in front of me. I slid it across the glass table until it rested directly under the lawyer's hands. "Counselor," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "before you threaten a civil lawsuit for financial abandonment, you should properly vet your client. I did not establish a precedent of ongoing financial support. I was executing a structured, conditional disbursement under the terms of an irrevocable promissory note." Stephanie frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows pulling together in sudden confusion. "What is she talking about?" she demanded, looking at her lawyer. The lawyer picked up the document. His eyes began to scan the first paragraph. I watched his confident posture slowly begin to dissolve. 2 years ago, I explained, projecting my voice just enough so the entire lobby could hear the truth. My late husband secured a massive personal loan for Stephanie to open her holistic meditation center. Because he was a brilliant man who understood the exact nature of this family, he forced her to sign a digital promissory note. It explicitly categorized any future utility payments, grocery deliveries, or lifestyle subsidies as conditional advances on that initial loan. The lawyer turned to the second page. His hands were trembling slightly. "The note is entirely irrevocable," I continued calmly. "It grants me the unilateral right to terminate the advances at my sole discretion, at any time, for any reason. Furthermore, it contains a demand clause. It means that by terminating the disbursements last night, the entire accumulated balance of the loan is now due in full." Stephanie's jaw dropped. She looked at Maribel, then back at me. "You cannot do that. I am your sister mom. Tell her she cannot do that." Maribel stepped forward, but the lawyer held up a single hand to stop her. He was no longer looking at Stephanie with professional solidarity. He was looking at her like she was a walking liability. He realized he had marched into a corporate headquarters to threaten an executive without possessing a single correct fact. "Is this your verified digital signature on page 4? The lawyer asked Stephanie, his voice suddenly tight and completely drained of its previous arrogance. Stephanie blinked, stumbling over her words. "I mean, maybe David brought me some electronic forms to sign 2 years ago for the business. But it was just family paperwork. It does not mean anything." "In a court of law, it means absolutely everything," I corrected her softly. The lawyer swallowed hard. He placed the document back on the table. The trap had snapped shut. The cheap lawyer was rapidly recalculating his position. He had taken this case hoping for a quick settlement, assuming I would pay him to quietly go away and avoid a public family scandal. Instead, he found himself staring at an ironclad financial contract that completely invalidated his entire threat of a civil lawsuit. He cleared his throat nervously, picking up his briefcase. "Well, be that as it may," he stammered. refusing to meet my eyes. There are still ethical considerations regarding the sudden termination of essential household services. Before you continue discussing ethics, I interrupted smoothly, you should probably ask your client about the second mortgage on her home. The lawyer stopped moving. He looked at Stephanie. What second mortgage? Stephanie went completely rigid. The color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her looking terrifyingly pale. Miyuki, do not do this, she hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic, desperate whisper. Observing David, I saw him step forward, moving away from his son and standing directly under the bright atrium lights. He looked at the lawyer with the exhausted, hollow expression of a man who had nothing left to lose. My wife opened a high-interest commercial loan against our property equity, David stated clearly. She did not consult me. She did not ask for my permission. She completely forged my electronic signature on the bank documents to secure the funds for her business. I only discovered it this morning. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the lobby. The lawyer stared at Stephanie in absolute horror. Forging a signature on a mortgage application is not a family misunderstanding. It is mortgage fraud. It is a severe federal offense. And this lawyer had just publicly threatened me on behalf of a woman who was actively committing financial crimes. Did you forge his signature? The lawyer demanded, his voice cracking. Stephanie burst into a fresh wave of tears. But this time, they were not manufactured for sympathy. They were the desperate tears of a woman who had finally been caught. I was going to pay it back, she sobbed. The meditation center just needed more time to become profitable. I am trying to heal people. Turkish-kra. The lawyer did not wait to hear the rest of her excuse. He snapped his briefcase shut with a sharp, echoing click. I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel, he announced, his voice shaking with panic. Do not contact my office again. Wait, Stephanie screamed, reaching out to grab his sleeve. You cannot leave me here. You said we were going to sue her. The lawyer yanked his arm away as if she were contagious. He did not look back. He power-walked across the marble floor, practically shoving his way through the revolving glass doors to get out of the building. Stephanie stood alone in the center of the corporate lobby. Her legal shield had evaporated in less than 3 minutes. Taking another sip of my coffee, I watched her crumble. She was completely defenseless now. With her lawyer sprinting down the street and her financial crimes exposed to everyone in the lobby, Stephanie panicked. She spun around to face her husband. For 15 years, David had been her ultimate safety net. He had absorbed her moods, funded her delusions, and apologized when she was the one in the wrong. She reached out, pressing her manicured hands against his damp work shirt. David, please, she begged, her voice trembling violently. You have to help me. Tell her to turn the money back on. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. David looked down at her hands. He did not pull away, but he did not hold her either. He simply looked at her with a profound, crushing emptiness. We already lost everything. Stephanie, he said softly. You spent it. You spent our future so you could pretend to be someone you are not. I can fix it, she cried, clinging to him. I will get a job. I will close the center. Just stand by me. David slowly reached up and removed her hands from his chest. I am choosing reality, he said, his voice echoing with devastating finality. I am filing for divorce on Monday morning, and I am taking Andrew with me. Stephanie let out a sharp, guttural gasp. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. Maribel could no longer stay silent. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Stephanie and glaring at David. Marriage is sacred, Maribel yelled, her voice breaking with indignation. You do not abandon your wife when she is struggling, and Miyuki, you are a monster. You orchestrated this entire humiliation. Closing my red dossier, I handed it back to Nora, who took it with a silent nod of respect. Then, I turned my attention to the woman who had spent my entire life teaching me that I was only valuable if I was paying the bills. I did not orchestrate her fraud, Maribel, I said calmly. I did not force her to steal from her husband, and I did not force her son to steal from my daughter. I simply stopped paying the premium subscription to your shared delusion. She is your sister, Maribel sobbed, holding Stephanie tightly. Family protects family. Family does not hold a knife to your throat and demand you pay for the privilege of bleeding. I replied, offering David a single, respectful nod. I watched him acknowledge the painful truth we had both finally accepted. He turned and walked out of the building, gesturing for Andrew to follow him. Andrew looked completely terrified, but he followed his father out into the rain. I turned my back on my mother and my sister. I did not wait for security to escort them out. I simply walked toward the executive elevator. Their screaming faded behind the glass. The doors slid shut. 2 weeks later, the harsh chill of the Oregon winter had fully settled over Portland. The fallout from that morning in the lobby had been swift and absolute. David had kept his word. He filed for divorce, moved into a small apartment, and legally forced the sale of the heavily mortgaged house. Stephanie, entirely bankrupt and devoid of any usable skills, had been forced to move into the cramped spare bedroom of Maribel's house. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. Checking the security camera, I saw Maribel standing on my front porch. She was holding a large, white pastry box from an expensive bakery I used to love when I was a child. Opening the door, I kept the security chain engaged. I looked at her through the narrow gap. "Miyuki," she said softly, offering a fragile, wavering smile. "I brought your favorite pastries. I thought we could sit down and talk. This family has been through so much ugliness recently. It is time we forgive and forget." I stared at the white box. This was her classic strategy. She believed that a baked good and a soft tone could pave over decades of toxic behavior. She wanted reconciliation, but she wanted it entirely on her terms, without taking an ounce of accountability for enabling Stephanie's abuse. "I am not angry anymore, Maribel," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "But I'm also not interested." Her smile faltered. "You cannot hold a grudge forever. I am your mother. We share the same blood." Looking deeply into her eyes, I realized then that blood is just biology. True family is not composed of people who demand you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Family consists of the people who protect you when you are vulnerable. Biology is not a blank check for disrespect, I told her. You are not welcome here. I closed the door gently and slid the deadbolt into place. I did not feel a single pang of guilt. I felt completely free. An hour later, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Andrew. He was wearing a heavy, bright yellow rain slicker. His face was weathered from the cold, and he looked thoroughly exhausted. He did not look like an arrogant influencer. He looked like a young man learning the brutal weight of the real world. Hannah came downstairs and stood silently beside me. Andrew reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He handed it to Hannah. His hands were covered in raw, peeling blisters. He had spent the last 2 weekends working grueling shifts at the commercial shipping docks in the freezing rain. "There is $600 in there," Andrew said, his voice raspy. "It is the first installment for your lens. I will have the rest by the end of next month." He swallowed hard, looking directly into her eyes. "I am incredibly sorry. I had no right to take your things." Hannah took the envelope. She did not smile, but she nodded in quiet acceptance. Real accountability had finally begun. By the end of the month, the financial landscape of my life had entirely transformed. The $4,260 that used to automatically vanish from my checking account was now being redirected. I opened a high-yield university savings trust for Hannah. Every single month, that exact amount was deposited into her future. The money that had once funded my sister's toxic delusions was now securing my daughter's education. On a crisp, clear Friday evening, Hannah's high school hosted their annual Winter Arts Showcase. I stood in the back of the crowded gymnasium, holding a small paper cup of warm cider. I watched my daughter stand proudly beside a large display board featuring her stunning landscape photography. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up her entire face. Around her neck, securely attached to a heavy strap, was a brand new $1,800 professional camera lens. She had purchased it herself. Combining the cash, Andrew was slowly paying her back with the rest of her savings. She looked confident. She looked safe. She looked like a young woman who knew her boundaries would always be defended. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was wonderfully quiet. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a pot of dark roast coffee. I poured myself a mug and sat down at the marble island where this entire war had started just a few weeks prior. I opened my laptop and checked my email. There were no frantic alerts from the power company. There were no automated receipts for organic groceries delivered to someone else's porch. I had heard through the family grapevine that Stephanie was currently working a minimum wage retail job, bitterly complaining to anyone who would listen about how the universe had betrayed her. It did not matter to me. She was no longer my problem. There were no manipulative messages demanding more of my time, my money, or my sanity. There was only the quiet, beautiful hum of my own life. For years, I had believed that being the strong one meant carrying the crushing weight of everyone else's failures. I thought that maintaining the peace required me to silently absorb the cost of their bad behavior. But peace built on your own silence is not peace at all. It is simply a hostage situation with better manners. True legacy is not defined by the money you inherit or the bloodline you share. True legacy is the dignity you adamantly refuse to surrender, and the boundaries you fiercely protect for the people who truly matter. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter warmth as the morning sun finally broke through the Portland fog. If Miyuki's journey empowered you to set your own boundaries, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below telling me how you took your power back. I closed the laptop screen. The coffee tasted absolutely perfect.